how could the embarrassment of asking for help, which by the way, there doesn't turn out to be when you actually do it, but I know the fear is there. How is that more shameful than some of the stuff you do to the people that you love and the way you treat yourself and feel about yourself? I think that's where I'd start.
Yeah.
Is like, you don't deserve bad things in your life. You don't. Now, you might be responsible for some and you should be accountable for them, but you don't deserve them. Once we convince that, let go, just try this is maybe the best advice I would give. Just as a thought experiment, what if you did deserve better? Like, just, I know we're going to talk ourselves into thinking we don't, whatever the case may be, but just as a thought experiment, what if I did deserve better? And think of it life that way and watch what happens.
Drew, thank you so much for joining me here. Really appreciate. We had our, if I remember right, going back, it was somebody that I want to say it was Becca that saw you speak. This was years ago, and she messaged me and said, "Hey, I saw this guy named Drew Dudley speak. You should meet him." I was like, "I'd love to meet him." And then she did an intro email, and then you and I chatted, and then COVID happened, and then a brain tumor happened, and we just recently reconnected. So I'm happy that this is all coming together. And I know you're a busy man, and for taking the time out. So I appreciate you coming on here with me. Yeah,
my man, it's a long time since Cornelius Sparklesteed, if I remember correctly, which is what I will always remember is when you told me the name of the main character of your book.
Yeah,
To this day, if I ever hit the lottery and bought myself a racehorse, he is Cornelius Sparklesteed. I will put TM and your name next to it, my man. But without a doubt, Cornelius Sparklesteed. If you haven't picked up the book, everybody go get it.
I appreciate that, man. Thank you so much. So I want to jump in with one question for you and kind of give you an idea. First, a little caveat before is to tell you how we define hope on Beyond Hope Project, which is a little different. I think hope is one of those words people have their own meaning for it. So I decided I needed to define what that meant for me, especially if I was going to make something called Beyond Hope. And the way I look at hope is the ignition switch. So it's the starting point to start your path. So I want to help people find the path. And then like in life, people are going to start going down that path, and they're going to find their gurus, and they're going to find all this stuff, and they're going to think that somebody's got the answer. And then, ultimately failure, or whatever they classify as failure, is going to happen. And I think people's most often response is like, I'm failing. And instead, what I want to be is also the person that shows them like, no, you didn't fail. You've been learning this whole time. Let me show you the path again. It's just moved maybe a little over here. So with the idea of that definition, if you can go back into Drew's life at any point in time and provide a little hope for him, what would that look like? Maybe what age? Give me a little context of that story of hope.
Wow, that is such a really good question. Like, when would you go back? Because the idea, it isn't to go and avoid what put you in a position to need hope. It's like, what would you say if you had to go back, live that moment again? When did you most need it?
Yeah.
And what's interesting is you just made me realize how lucky I am in many ways, because when I go back to those moments and think, okay, this is where current Drew would slide in and be helpful. It's strange because I keep thinking of all the people who are already there and how good a job that they did in picking me up in these really bad moments. I've lost a lot of friends. I think I've been to 21 funerals and I've only been to 13 weddings. And a lot of those folks were under the age of 25. And so over and over again, I've had these moments where I've been told that somebody I loved, usually who were very young, were gone. And every single time I had people there. And so I'm trying to think of when would be the best time. And I honestly, man, you know what I think it might be? I'll go really recently, and I'll go as recently as a year ago. And I went through a really bad depressive downturn towards the end of the pandemic. I actually handled the first part of the pandemic pretty well. I needed a downtime. And so the idea of getting off the road and having 6 weeks to lie in bed and let my plantar fasciitis heal and all the other things that came, it was great. But the last 2 years, I went through a bad depressive cycle. I was really alone. I lived on the side of a mountain doing my speeches from a studio there. And I'd love to go back and talk to that guy one day when he was alone, on the side of that mountain after finishing a speech and wondering if he'd ever get the chance to go back and be in front of an audience again, and let him know that 2 years from now, he's going to be feeling better than he's felt in years. The last time I can think of, like, the time in my life when I look back and I'm like, that's where I want to get to, was 2016 and 17. And then, like, right at the beginning of 2017, I lost the woman I was seeing at the time. She died by suicide, and everything sort of started to tip downwards. And then the pandemic tipped it all the way. And as someone who's bipolar, man, I dropped a lot of stuff in this one answer, right?
Yeah.
As someone who's bipolar, you go through those depressive swings. It. It doesn't make it easier, but I started to come out of that. And not only are things in life good, but my brain chemistry right now is allowing me to recognize the things that are good. Because one of the problems with depression is that your chemistry is altered such that you can't take pleasure from things. I remember opening up the box of my first book, and after years of wanting to put out a book, I open up the book, and there it is sitting in front of me, fresh from the publisher, and I felt nothing. And that's when I knew I was in something bad, that I felt nothing when I opened up this huge life. And you have to act like you do, right? Because you should. Right. And so you almost try to act yourself into it. So I think I'd like to go back and talk to Drew Dudley in 2021. And I'd like to say, you've gone through ups and downs, and I know that you've told yourself and everybody else that you should draw on the downs to remind yourself of what you've gone through. And I know that this feels like the one time that it's not going to work out, but it is. And this 4 or 5 year cycle of depression that you've gone through is almost over. And that means that finally your feelings are going to align with the realities of your life. And that, to me, would be something that would have been a great thing to have had a chance to hear there. But otherwise, man, it's a long answer, I know, but I'm really lucky. You asking me that made me realize that if I went back to sort of support me during those times when I needed hope, I'd have to get in line. And that's a pretty lucky thing to have true. So I appreciate you asking that off the top. It got me thinking.
Yeah, that's a great answer. And yeah, there's a lot in there that I would love to like talk about, because I think that, and I'm just curious out of just my own curiosity here is, I realized through the clarity of a brain tumor, like what I had been doing a lot of times in my past was basically telling the world what I wished for, but not actually believing the stuff that I was doing. And I wonder, like, in what you're talking about there, you kind of alluded to, like, you knew you were supposed to be this way. And I know you as you've done those speaking things, you've been doing lots of speaking stuff. And before we dive into like the whole story behind that, but like, do you find that was the case for you as well? Were you kind of projecting out into the world what you wished, but you secretly kind of are like a little bit like, am I buying what I'm saying, or am I off on that?
It's weird. It's different. Like, I buy what I say, I just don't always execute on it.
Yes. Okay. And that's a better way to say it.
Yeah. And because I think I get what you're getting at. And the answer is 100%. It's almost like, as a speaker who talks about changing behavior, there's a couple different ways you can go at it. You could either be someone who is really good at it, and now you're teaching, and so your presentations are almost a lesson or a teach on how other people can do it. And that's what I hope mine do. But at the same time, I also got to be honest, mine is like a constant reminder to myself. Mm-hmm. And so every presentation I give on what are your values and how do you execute on them and how do you create these moments of impact, how do you take care of yourself, I think, is the big one. That's the one I bump into all the time, because I go up and I give these strategies on self-respect, self-compassion, self-care. And honestly, every time I give the speech, it's like I'm giving it to myself, because I know there is a gap between what I'm saying will work and what I'm actually doing. But it actually is part of the reason that I get motivated to do it, is because I know it works. Mm-hmm. I know that if I execute on these things that I'm talking about, that my life gets better. And it's really hard to go on stage and talk about doing it if you're not doing it yourself. And so it's almost like I'm forcing myself into doing what's good for me by talking about it. Yeah. And so, yeah, I always doubt that, man. I'm always like, in this moment, I know exactly what advice I would give someone I loved. And why on earth do you not accept that? And then what happens is you're like, because how do I know if I'm right? And then the voice in your head goes, all right, well, if you don't know that you're right, people pay you to share these ideas. And are you misleading people?
Mm.
And then, of course, are you a fraud? On and on we go.
Yeah.
And there's that concept of imposter syndrome, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't like the term, man. I don't like the term imposter syndrome because syndrome is like an illness.
Yeah.
And it means there's something different, right? I've actually found that syndrome means it's medical term for we've seen it before, but we don't know what it is. But that idea of imposter syndrome, I think everybody feels it.
Mm.
And the people who don't are this small group of people who are narcissistic, and they're a relatively small group though. I think most people feel imposter syndrome. And if almost everyone feels something, how is it a syndrome? That's like saying you have oxygen CO2 exchange syndrome. It's what everyone does. It's a fundamental part of humanity, right? So I always am like, am I alone in this? I don't think so. And if we all think we're frauds, are any of us really frauds?
Mm.
And so, yeah, man, like that question of when you're giving this advice, do you feel a disconnect between what you're telling people works and what you're actually doing is for sure. And that disconnect was really making it hard to do my job because I was so depressed and I was battling so hard with those feelings that I couldn't actually execute on some of the things that I knew would make my life better. And so you start to feel like, what right do you have to actually pass it on? But it's still good advice, even if you're not living it. It's not like you're giving advice doesn't work and that's why you're not taking it. It's more the challenge that we all face, whether it's with circumstances beyond our control or mental illness or physical disabilities. We all have those things, right, that stand in the way of us being everything we want to be at all times. And so, yeah, man, but it's a real feeling. Yeah. As I think any speaker feels it, because there's a lot of pressure when you teach other people to make sure that you're perfect in what you do. And that's too much pressure for anyone to put on themselves.
100%. I think a lot of times people that are, you kind of talked about where it's almost like you have the speakers that are, you can't hide how authentic it is. Like it's almost like it becomes, you get into this business, this speaking world even, or I think any writing or any sort of creative endeavor, because it's almost therapy first. That's why I kind of have explained to people. It's always funny to me. And actually, before we got on here, I did a solo episode on this that, I just recently went and had a keynote at a big company. And it was like, man, I can't believe like I'm coming here. And then it was like, and I'm in it and I'm going like, I can't believe the reaction I'm getting from this group and like seeing people crying and stuff. And it was just like in my head, it was like, because one of the things I've struggled with, and she's actually bounced off you because you might actually have a perspective on it, is that, if you were to take me back 3 years ago prior to tumor, I wouldn't even recognize who that person is. Like I have changed so much, and I don't know if it's the clarity of the tumor or the belief thing, but it's amazing to me that all I'm doing is just being myself, like really who I've always felt like I was, saying the same stuff. I've changed it a little bit because I have a little more clarity on it, but essentially saying the same stuff. The difference is I actually believe it now versus just saying it before because I felt like it was the right thing to say. And I think that people, and tell me if you agree or disagree, but people that are doing like the work, like what I think we do, which is like more service, heart-led type of thing. I haven't met anybody yet that's not afflicted with some sort of self-deprecating depression. There's always a catch that we're always kind of using as that, like, it's almost like you have a cut that won't heal and every once in a while gotta like, it's got to bust open a little bit. Oh yeah, I got to deal with that. You have any thoughts on that?
Yeah. I mean, insight comes from pain, right? Like you don't become wiser from stuff working out. And, I think that it becomes dangerous if stuff keeps working out for you because you forget that most of your growth and insight comes from the times that it doesn't. And I think that one of the things about speaking, and you talk about authenticity, and honestly, man, I can't get over, and I don't know how. So I like to think it's real because I don't know how to put it on. And so if people come up and say, I really like your authenticity, I never go into a presentation thinking, okay, be authentic.
Mm-hmm.
And so if I'm coming off as authentic, then I must be, because that's one, like I try to pace it right. I try to be emotionally connecting. I try to know these moments where you're going to like come close to making people cry or hit them emotionally. All of that is planned out. The arc is planned out, but never do I go in being like, and I'm going to be super authentic. So it just comes if you do it. The key, I think, that people have to remember is that if you're going to go up on stage, it's weird you say it's therapy. I think a lot of comedians say it as that. I've heard a comedian say, if I couldn't come up here and work through my crap every night, I'd have been gone 10 years ago. Like, there's no way it'll work. But I think as long as your story is about the audience, I've heard speakers go on and tell harrowing stories of the things that they've gone through. And the problem is at the end, they don't then say, and here is why this matters to you. Here are the things that this very personal and unique experience that only I had, here are the ways that it can be relevant to your life. Here are the 3 lessons that I pulled from surviving on Everest. Here are the 5 things that I learned about everyday life from a surprise brain tumor. Those are the key pieces of being someone who's a speaker, because you're not up there to tell your story. You're up there to connect with their stories using yours. So it's got to be your stories, but you shouldn't be the main character. They should be the main character. And the idea of telling your story is to be useful, not inspiring, and not, not someone to look up to. Your goal as a speaker is to be useful. Mm-hmm. And so whatever your amazing story is, it better be applied to theirs. And I've seen speakers go up and tell, and it's a therapy session, and they pour out this unbelievable story. And then you've got the audience being like, wow, I can't believe what you've been through. Like, now tell me how you did it. And they don't. And that's a challenge, right? You got to make sure that you do. So I love the fact that our job gives us the opportunities to share things that you see resonate with people.
Yeah.
And I also love the fact that I can be open about my alcoholism or my battle with my weight or my bipolar or now my ADHD. My God, it's a litany at this point. But I can be open about those things, because then people can't use them as weapons against you either.
Right.
It's like Eminem at the end of 8 Mile, right? Like, here is everything about me. Now come after me with something.
Right.
And so I think that's I find that empowering. Yeah. People come up and say that's courage. And God, that sounded like a humble brag there, but you know what I mean? People come up and say that's courageous. And I'm sort of more like, it's more of a defense mechanism. If you want to be honest, maybe I don't have the courage to face some of the things I've done or said in the past. And as such, I'm open about it so that I can deflect whenever somebody brings it at me. I can say, I know I've been open about that, right?
Yeah.
What are they going to attack you with when you've acknowledged your mistakes as best you can?
Yeah. And the thing that's funny about your story is that, I reading your bio, like I what I did not know was that, like, basically the TED Talk was like sprung on you, like by a group of students, and if anybody doesn't know yet, it'll be a link here, but I'm going to guess there's a good chance that how many views is this? It's millions of people have watched your TED Talk and been inspired by it. But like, how did that play out? And like, did you know immediately, like, oh, I'm a speaker? Like, did you kind of take to it right away, or was it something that you fought? Like, is it something you've always wanted to do? What was the feeling like of that situation?
Yeah, I think when you look back, and I realize the diagnoses I've had on the mental illness side, particularly the ADHD and the bipolar, I look back at my life, and when you're going through manic stages, what happens is you kind of want to be the center of attention. And I always like being the center of attention. And as such, I always was trying to entertain. I always felt that if the room was quiet, I felt pressure on me to do something about that. I was not comfortable with silence. And so I would always try to fill it. And I remember the first time I ever went on stage, though, was as an actor in a short play. And during dress rehearsal, I forgot every line that I had. And it was the most mortifying, horrifying, empty feeling that I've ever had in my life. And I think because I still had to go on Monday, the dress rehearsal was Friday, I spent the entire weekend just trying to nail it. And I went on stage and it went great. And so the feeling of it going great, I wanted again and again. the terror of having been on stage and forgetting everything is what has driven me every day since, I think, is that I have to go on and be prepared, because before my brain let me down and left me hanging, and I can't have that. I have to be great. The TED Talk, the students did register me for without my knowledge, and I was accepted to do it. But you want to know the speaking side of it, I didn't consider myself a speaker at that point. But if you want to know how I became a speaker, man, it's because I wanted to get 100% academically. And I would take notes verbatim from my professors, go home and type them out. And then when it came time for midterms and finals, I would convert the notes that I had, typed. I'd convert them into PowerPoint presentations. I'd write hour and a half long lectures, and I would then deliver the lecture out loud to nobody. And that way, when I went in to write the test, I could remember saying it. I could remember hearing myself say it. I could remember the prof saying it. I could remember looking at it, typing it. I basically gave my mind a million different ways I could remember the look of it on the screen. I gave my brain a million ways to remember the content. And that led me to getting great grades. But it also led me to doing hundreds of hours of standing alone in a dorm room, pretending to stand in front of an audience, trying to teach an hour and a half of content. And what I learned from doing that was that the best way to remember stuff was to turn it into stories. And when I had the opportunity to start running charities and to start training volunteers, I started training using stories. And the thrill of being up in front of people, watching how your story impacted them, that's how it all started, man. I actually became a speaker by practicing hundreds of hours in front of nobody. And then by the end of my time at university, people from the class would come and sit in my dorm room and listen to the lectures, because apparently I got pretty good at them. But I used my speaking as a functional way of making me a better student. And in the process, in hundreds of hours of practice with no audience, turned me into somebody who was pretty good at knowing how to take an idea and wrap it in Velcro. Because these weren't my ideas, these things the profs taught. Right. I had to figure out a way of making them sticky. Yeah. And then I was able to apply that process to my own ideas. Because a lot of the stuff I talk about isn't new, man. Yeah. But I find a way to try to make it sticky.
Yeah.
Wrap it in Velcro, basically.
Absolutely. Well, it's funny too, because like you, in a way, like you took what other would perceive as some sort of not superpower, and you turned it into your superpower. Like your inability to just sit in silence. You're like, okay. And then you gave yourself this thing to learn from. And, man, that's cool. I used to do the same thing with drawing. That was like my thing. It was like, I learned that if I wanted to take things in, I always would, especially when in the corporate world, I would be like, if I'm drawing, don't think I'm ignoring you all. This is how I quiet my brain so I can hear you all. And I would fill up just the pages with all these doodles all over the place. And I remember them asking me a couple of times like questions, and I would, oh yeah, well, and I would just go kick back right to them, everything they just said. And you're like, yeah, everybody's got their own way of doing stuff. And I think that is like what's pretty amazing. So in your process, like what would be like something that you would say, a lot of times people ask for, help, right? Like this idea of asking for help. And let's say there is somebody out there that is in the same spot you are, that is diagnosed with these things, or they're struggling with mental health, or they're struggling with trying to figure out what direction there is. And they have somebody like a Drew Dudley that they're looking at, what do you ask? How do you advise people the best way to go about asking for help is? Because what I have found is that asking for help, it's two-way. One, it's super empowering, but at the same time, it's also incredibly frightening, because I think it addresses the biggest thing where people think, I'm dumb and I don't know anything, so I got to ask for help. And it's very shame, especially if you're a person that's rooted in shame. So what's your best advice for anybody that's looking for help?
Well, I think the first thing I would say is that if you don't know what you're struggling with, the thing that help does is it actually connects you to an entire knowledge base. I didn't know, I thought ADHD was something completely different than what it was until I was diagnosed with it at 46 last year. And all of a sudden, I had this entire knowledge base, whether it's online in 30-second clips or it's actual books and insights, that this is what your disease is. And it was like my whole life started to make more sense. Like basically, I give you my advice to this. Why don't you deserve to understand yourself better, feel better, and treat other people better? Like, what downside is there to that? Why don't you deserve that? And the thing is, every answer we give as to why we don't deserve it is usually caused by the illness, right? I don't deserve it because I get drunk all the time and say terrible things. I don't deserve it because I don't follow through on projects that I said I would do, because that's a huge thing for people with ADHD. I don't deserve it because I'm a miserable person who causes pain to my friends and family when I go through these manic episodes, right? But every reason you don't deserve to feel better that you give yourself is driven by the illness. It's not who you are, it's who the illness has made you. And there's no reason you don't deserve to feel better. And if you can't convince yourself that you don't deserve to feel better, the people you love deserve to be treated better. And if you've tried everything else, the power of your will, trying to access the love that you have for other people, and now you feel as if you're not a good friend because you can't overcome your behaviors, even though you're saying, I want to do it because I love these people. And then when you fail, you start to think, I'm a terrible person, my love isn't worth anything. It's all driven by the illness. All the behaviors you think make you not deserving are driven by the illness. Why don't you deserve to feel better? And why don't the people you love deserve to be treated better? And once you realize there is no good answer to that, that makes it a lot easier. And ultimately, one of the things was, no matter what I did and how sick I was, I didn't want to hurt people I loved. And I did all the time. And so I kept telling myself that there is no bigger shame than hurting the people you love. So you're afraid of asking for help? Well, why? Because I'm going to be ashamed? How is that not more shame? Like, how could the embarrassment of asking for help, which, by the way, there doesn't turn out to be when you actually do it, but I know the fear is there. How is that more shameful than some of the stuff you do to the people that you love and the way you treat yourself and feel about yourself? I think that's where I'd start. Yeah. Is like, you don't deserve bad things in your life. You don't. Now, you might be responsible for some and you should be accountable for them, but you don't deserve them. Once we convince that, let go, just try this is maybe the best advice I would give. Just as a thought experiment, what if you did deserve better? Like, just, I know we're going to talk ourselves into thinking we don't, whatever the case may be, but just as a thought experiment, what if I did deserve better? And think of it life that way and watch what happens.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful, man. What in your process of getting to those conclusions for yourself was the most helpful thing that you did? That was it therapy? Was it journaling? What was the thing that you found to be the most helpful for yourself individually?
Accountability with other people, informing other people that I cared about, like, the inner circle, letting them know what was going on, how it impacted me, asking if they'd be willing to take some time to look at some material, whether it was a book that I thought was like one book that was particularly helpful or one article. And of course they're willing to do that. Like, nobody who is in your inner circle is ever going to be like, oh, homework, hell no. And letting them know what was going on, letting them know what the symptoms were, and letting them know what it getting worse looked like, and giving them permission to start awkward conversations if they see some of those things. That was really helpful to me, is going to my closest friends and saying, this is what a manic episode looks like. Be on the lookout for this. Am I spending a bunch of money all of a sudden out of nowhere? Am I jumping all over the place in conversation? Am I talking when the social interaction is clearly over? And so keep an eye out for those things. Let me know if you see them. Can you help me if I tell you that I'll do something? Do you mind following up more than is probably appropriate to have to do? Because the ADHD means this is the case. Excuse the fact that I'm going to forget names. It's just, they don't stick in my head. Being open and asking people to be on the lookout for when the symptoms are getting worse has been a huge thing for me. Accountability from other people and the support of other people, because what makes us sick is the thing that's supposed to warn us that we're getting sick, and at least in my world. So my brain is not good at saying you're manic. That's not how mania works, right? So I think that's one of the key things, is embracing how much help other people within your inner circle can be. It doesn't mean doing what I do necessarily, standing on stage and saying, this is a mental illness I battle. It means telling 4 people though, and being very intimate about what that means and how it impacts you. Because not only then do you get help in catching it when it's happening, you get more forgiveness when it does, because people know it's not personal. Doesn't mean that they're still not hurt by that thing you said, but they do know that it wasn't about them. It was a disease. And that's hard sometimes to look at, but people get better at it. And then they can separate your worst behavior from your character.
Yeah.
Because unfortunately, mental illness often brings out the worst parts of your personality, but it's not your actual character. I don't know if that makes sense.
Totally. 100%.
Sorry, not your personality. It brings out bad behaviors that don't reflect your actual character, I think is a better way to put it.
So how do you go about, like, if you're having those episodes when you're, I mean, I'm assuming, I'm sure, because I've had those moments myself, when you're getting ready to go on stage in front of X amount of people and you're like, just not feeling, like, do you have something that your go-to? Like, let's say nobody's available, that circle's gone. Like, what is it that you do to kind of get past that moment of like, oh God, I just can't life right now, you know?
Yeah. What's weird is that the speaker analogy has only happened twice. If you can believe that.
Wow.
I've only ever, and I think I'm coming up on 1,000 professional speeches. I've done over 1,000 just in total, but we're talking like people pay me to go and do it. I'm coming up on 1,000. And only twice that I can remember was I ever like, I don't want to do this right now. And that was scary to me. And it was around that time when it was all virtual, when I was talking about how I was in a really bad downward spiral. And it really scared me, because that was the one thing that no matter how dark it got, it always brought me joy. Was walking onto a stage. It's where I felt safe. It's where I felt like I had purpose. It's where I felt like I had value. And for a long time in my life, it's the only place I thought that was true. I've come to realize that that's really unhealthy thinking. But so that hasn't happened a lot. But when I'm like, I can't do life right now, what a great way of putting it. I think of the worst days of my life, and I remind myself that I got through that. I can do this. I've been through alcoholism. I've been through bipolar. I've been through losing the woman I loved. Like, at this point, if you want to take me out, you have to bring kryptonite. And I just tell myself that, like, there's a strength and a peace that comes from knowing the worst thing that has ever happened to you or could ever happen to you has already happened.
Yeah.
And I think that is the case with me. And there's a peace and a strength that comes from that. And that, to me, is what gets me when I have trouble adulting. And I also try to remember, man, like, you know what, this is goofy, and I don't like necessarily telling it, because it's not necessarily applicable to the people listening, because not everyone gets to do it. So I don't know if it's useful. I always picture me standing on the Great Wall of China, which I got to do, I think, in 2016 or 17. I got to stand on the Great Wall of China. And there is something about that always reminds me how unbelievably lucky I am, because I think if you don't live in China and you get the chance to stand on the Great Wall of China, you've had a cool life. Yeah. That is not an opportunity that many people get. I think that I always use that as a reminder. There's a show I love called The West Wing, and the president's giving a speech in The West Wing, and he's listing off the things that he'll tell his grandkids at the end of his life. And the first thing is, he said, I'll tell them I stood on the Great Wall of China. And ever since I heard that, I've been thinking to myself, that is something that not many people get to do. And I did. And no matter what else, that is a life of something, of some substance. And so I guess maybe what I'd say to all of you is, think about that thing that you've done, that you got to do because you are a lucky, privileged person. And look, our lives are not perfect. We've gone through crap, but I'm a straight white dude who was born in Canada. Like, I won the lottery already, right? And so whatever it is that your life gives you, freedom, the trip to Disney World, all right, if you've ridden with your kids on a roller coaster at Disney World, you have lived a cool life. And I just try to think of moments like that hardly anyone gets to do. And when I have trouble adulting, I just think to myself, you have no right, with everything that you've been given and all the strength you've been given to get through all this stuff. You just have no right. Like, be better. Yeah. And I kind of chew myself out, to be completely honest, which probably isn't healthy, man. But when faced with how lucky you are in this world, like, I've never really thought about it, but I guess I did this once, man. I never really thought about it till recently. I went to see a musical in New York called Kimberly Akimbo, and it won best Tony Award for best new musical. And it's about a little girl who has a disease that makes her age at I think 4 times the speed of a regular person. And all she wants to do is go to Florida because she's never left her town in New Jersey. And I'm sitting there in New York City in a Broadway theater, and I had just come from I forget where, but it was awesome. I'd been on the I'd been on the Lincoln Memorial steps, and then I'm in Broadway the same night watching this show about a girl who all she wants to do is go to Florida and leave New Jersey. And it just was one of those moments where I'm like, you have no right at this point to have a problem. I think of the morning we found my girlfriend, and I just remember that I survived that morning. And anytime I think I can't get through something, I just think of that morning, and I'm like, you got through that, and you're fine. You're going to be fine. You got through that. So I don't even have a New Year's Eve, man. My New Year's Eve is not December 31st because that's arbitrary. My New Year's Eve is January 16th, the night before she died, because the 17th of January was the worst day of my life.
Right.
And so the 16th is actually a night to celebrate because it represents another year of healing and another year of strength and another year of growing and another year of becoming whole again after that terrible day. And so instead of looking at it like, oh, was the worst day of my life, I look at it as a day I can celebrate another year becoming stronger from the worst day of my life. So that's like 8 answers to one question. No, maybe I'm going manic again, brother.
No, I'm just letting you roll because that was amazing. It's amazing, and kudos to you for having the strength to go through that. And and it's funny having that you're talking about all these reflections and on coming through stuff, which is a great segue into the last question I asked, which is if you could duplicate young you across the table from you and tell them all the stuff that you've done now as an adult, what do you think that little kid would say about all this stuff?
To answer that question, I have to go back to being that kid. And I got to admit it, man, I don't think I'd want to have that meeting if that's what was going to happen. If I didn't get to also tell him a bunch of other stuff, like if all I got to do was give him my resume, I think it would scare the crap out of him. And I think at that point in my life, I'll tell you how I think that kid would react. I love telling stories, man. When I was that kid, the last year of high school, my parents let me throw the end of high school party, the one that's at the end of every teen movie. Everyone goes up to so-and-so's cottage, and that's when all the storylines come together. There's one couple that kiss on a dock. Yeah. And there's another comedic one that get lost in the woods. But anyway, this party, I got to host it. And I'm sitting against the cottage, and I'm having a beer with my buddy Scott. And Scott's this brilliant musician, athlete, scholar. He's good at everything. And 2 of our friends have got their arms wrapped around each other, and they're watching the sunset go down. So I have this couple silhouetted in front of a sunset. It looks like a painting, and I get kind of pissed because I'm single, and I've been single my whole high school life. And I turn to Scotty, and I'm like, see, I wish I had that. And Scotty goes, man, for a guy who has everything, I can't believe how much you talk about what you don't have. And I was like, first of all, the idea that I had everything kind of blew my mind in the eyes of somebody else. And so I got defensive. I said, I don't have everything. All I have is pressure. All I have is the ability to let all of you down because I have all these grades and awards and everyone's telling me about what they expect from me and they can't wait to see what I'm going to do in the world. All I have is pressure. And all I have is the ability to let people down. And that's not something I want. It's actually a curse. And he looked at me and said, man, you got to give your friends more credit, man. He said, we don't love you because of the guy you might be one day. We love you because of the guy you are now. And I wish you'd start to do that too. He was 18, right? Like that's some, and Scotty died at 19, rear-ended by literally rear-ended by a cement truck on the highway outside of his hometown. And that's the type of people I've been lucky enough to find around me. And I don't know if the fact he's gone makes those words stick more, but that to me, I think if I'd sat down and talked to that kid, and just if I was only allowed to give the resume, and I think this is a lesson about how our biography and our resume doesn't necessarily reflect our actual lives. Because if I just told him, okay, you wrote a book, and he wouldn't know what a TED Talk was, but you gave a talk that millions of people looked at, and you got to be a professor at multiple universities and get invited to keynote these things all around the world. I think the poor kid would sit there and be like, oh my God, more pressure. Like what must I have to go through to deliver on all of those things? And I don't know if I can handle it. Yeah. But if I was allowed to say to him, you're going to have this incredible experience with your friends. You're going to travel all over and see these things. You're going to do it all while doing something that you love and you actually are naturally talented at as well. You're also going to overcome things that were way harder than you thought you could ever face before, and you'll overcome them all. Mm-hmm. If I could add context to it all, if I could tell him that he'll become less stressed out about having to deliver for other people, if I could tell him that the path would be easier than he envisioned, I'd do it. But if I could only tell him what I did, I think it would freak him out. And I think it would make him wonder if he could do it. And I think it would make him terrified that even though he knows he's talking to me and it clearly happened, I think it would make him wonder if somehow he was going to screw it up.
Man, that's a great answer, Drew.
Because I was dumb as crap at 18. And I was more hateful of myself at 18 than anyone should be.
Unfortunately, I have a lot of experience with that myself. And that may be one of the best answers I've gotten from that question. So I appreciate you going there with me. And I definitely want to be respectful of your time because I know that you have a flight as well.
I'm having a blast if the flight's not like too soon. So I love your questions, man. You ask what you need to ask.
I appreciate that. Yeah. And, before we wrap up, I just want to like really just share my appreciation for you. When I reached out to you years ago, you didn't ever pause to help. And I still have the notes from that conversation. And I one of my things when I started moving into this world was at the top, and it credit to you is that like, but what does this story mean to them? And I remember you telling me that over and over, and it just really helped because being a natural storyteller myself, but writing for kids and writing for what was the little me, right? That is what I always kind of strive towards. And then when I switched to adults, it was like, you really kind of like, what does it mean to them? And it was funny how that is the exact same story. And you're sharing in the way that you framed all this stuff up. I just want to like, dude, I mean, you probably hear it a lot, but I want to just make sure you hear it from somebody that doesn't know you so well. Like, congratulations, man. You're doing like an awesome job at lifing.
Man, that is a compliment I have never given myself, man. So I really appreciate that.
And, and it's really, I celebrate like your vulnerability and doing that and showing other people that like hope does exist. Just because what is your hardest thing right now doesn't mean this defines who you are. Just happens to be what's happening right now. And I think you're a beacon for so many people out there that do that are struggling in that. And I know I don't have to tell you keep doing what you're doing because I know you're going to. But like there are people even on those days where you feel lonely and you feel like you're not doing it. You are doing it, and thanks, many man. People are being impacted by what you're doing. And yeah, just thanks for sharing life with me and being in this crazy journey with me. And
can I give you one more, man? Just that I thought of because I shouldn't do it because you just gave the nicest wrap up and like everything in my like broadcasting mind is like, oh man, that's a perfect slide out. But I just want to say this kintsugi. Do you know what kintsugi is?
No.
It's a Japanese art form where you put broken pieces of pottery back together using liquid gold.
Oh.
And that means the most beautiful part of the art is the part where it was broken. And I just wanted to share that with anybody listening, because I remember the woman who taught it to me, because I do these courses and workshops where I ask people to identify a value that's important to them. And she said resilience. And then you have to create a question. that you ask every day. And her question was, how did I embrace kintsugi today? And I asked her what it meant. She told me that I want the most beautiful parts of who I am to be where I was broken.
Wow.
And I just think knowing the work that you do and the way that you look at it and the concept of hope, like for me, what I try to do every day, ever since you told me that, was embody kintsugi, is recognize that I'm a bunch of pieces that have been put back together, but I was put back together with liquid gold. And that means that like every break is gorgeous. And it's I think just a cool way of thinking about the world, is that it's filled with kintsugi. And if you go online and you look at the actual art pieces, but you picture them as people, you start to realize like, yeah, that's me. And that's pretty gorgeous.
That's amazing, man.
You're gorgeous, baby.
You're gorgeous. That's right. And so guys, I will make sure that all of Drew's stuff is in the show notes and everything like that. Get his book. It's awesome. If you get a chance to check out his TED Talks, all these links are going to be in all the show notes. Great dude. Obviously, you reach out to him. When he's not traveling the world, he'll reach back out. Yeah,
I will actually. Yeah,
absolutely will. Yeah, but Drew, just thank you so much, man. I will enjoy your trip. Stay safe, my friend. Reach out anytime, and I look forward to talking to you soon.
My friend, stay positive, test negative.
All right, we'll see you, man. Bye.
Foxland Media. Think big.